Welcome, everyone. This is Nikki Keohoho, CEO and co-founder of the Direct Selling World Alliance. I am here to host a call today with a very dear friend, Amy Robinson. Amy is a 15-year veteran of direct selling, having served as a senior vice president and chief marketing officer at the United States Direct Selling Association. She developed a passion for direct sales through her work with more than 200 direct selling companies and thousands of independent direct selling consultants. Now in private practice, Amy is focused on assisting direct selling companies to take advantage of their inherent strengths and position themselves among the most respected retail brands in the marketplace. Whether it is public relations, reputation management, or market research, Amy's experience in direct selling gives her a unique perspective. Amy, we want to welcome you to the Executive Forum.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience today.
Well, great. Let's get started. Everyone, get your pen and paper out. Take great notes. There's going to be something for everyone in this webinar.
All right, great. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to talk a little bit about public relations and reputation management, and really focusing today on helping companies to tell their story, tell their brand story, to help their sellers tell their brand story so that they can have the most effective positioning in the marketplace. And as Nikki mentioned, I've been in direct selling for about 15 years. And now I've formed my own company, Social Selling Associates, and really I'm dedicated to helping direct selling companies, position themselves with amongst the other retailers that enjoy lots of brand recognition in the marketplace, looking at reputation management, and also helping with market research, because of course we all know that market research is really important no matter what field you're in. So like many, when I was first exposed to direct selling, I had a lot of questions about the business model, but I quickly realized that not only is it a wise choice for companies as a go-to-market strategy, but it also offers personal development and financial opportunity for people in really any life stage or situation. So I'm pleased today to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about how companies can make their brand story work for them and for their independent sellers. I'm going to start today at the point where a company has already developed its brand story, as really talking about developing your brand story could be a day-long seminar in and of itself. But I will just say that for direct selling companies in particular, having a strong brand story is critical to success. So for many people, the reason they fall in love with a brand is because they're really falling in love with what that brand represents. And especially for today's consumers, what's called attached meaning is one of the most important considerations when making a buying decision. They will gladly pay slightly more if they feel good about the company. And when it comes to direct selling, many sellers start because they love the founder's story and maybe even see a little of themselves in that person. So for small companies in particular, making that story personable and relatable is absolutely critical. But today we're going to start after the brand story is already created. And for as much as direct selling companies need a strong brand story, they have traditionally spent very limited resources telling that brand story in the marketplace. The result of this is often that even some of the most successful brands have relatively low recognition in the mainstream marketplace. Now, in the past, this was okay because sellers talked about the company one person at a time, and in the end, that was more cost efficient and probably more effective than mass advertising. But times have definitely changed. In today's marketplace, companies that don't have a presence in that marketplace aren't trusted. So to be clear, that doesn't mean you have to do mass advertising. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Not only is it much more affordable for companies to go direct to the general public with their brand message because of social media, but sellers are counting on it. They're looking for that support and for the brand recognition that comes along with it. Then their job is to amplify it while also adding their own personal story so they can relate it to their own customers. One of the greatest things about social media, especially for small companies, is that it has leveled the playing field significantly, because amazing things can be accomplished with a minimal budget. So the focus really can be on content and appeal instead of who has the most money to spend. But, and there's always a but, this also means that your brand story is being told through more channels than ever before. Direct selling companies have always struggled with maintaining consistency in their brand story because they're entrusting it to hundreds or even thousands of individuals to tell it. So not only does social media increase the number of people exposed to every piece of information that's out there, it may appear on dozens of platforms and be shared, liked, favorited, tweeted, retweeted, posted on Instagram, however many platforms you can think of. So the result is that the company must be the primary source of information. And you really need to ensure that you're providing that information in sufficient quantity and across all platforms so there won't be a void that make it so that sellers find it necessary to fill in with their own creative take on your brand story. So there's really three critical elements of conveying your brand story, and this is what we'll talk about today. Understanding the marketplace, specifically consumer attitudes and trends, supporting your sales force through strategic insertion of your brand story in the marketplace, and then training your sales force to tell your story the way you want it told. Now, before we delve into that, I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about two terms that are used a lot in today's marketplace. The first term that I'll talk about is social media. So 5 years ago, this was just a buzzword. Most people didn't understand it. They weren't sure it was going to stick around. They didn't know how to say anything in 140 characters, and most companies just wrote it off as a fad. But people said the same thing about television when it first hit the market, and we all know how that turned out. So it's pretty clear that social media is here to stay. And it's really how people communicate, especially younger consumers. So if you want to be part of the conversation, then you'd better be taking advantage of these channels. And it should be seen as an integrated part of the communications plan, not just something else that you do because someone said you should. That leads me to the next term, and that's social selling. Now, of course, I have some very specific thoughts about this term, as I think it's so critical for direct sellers that I even incorporated it into my company name. So if you search for the term social selling online, you'll find that it's defined in many, many ways. But most of them focus on social media as part of the sales process. But from my perspective, social media is not the essential component of social selling. The essential component of social selling is building relationships. And there's no doubt that today many people use social media to build relationships, but there are still plenty of other ways to build relationships. And that really is the key component when we're talking about social selling. Direct sellers have been doing social selling since day one, and it's just now the traditional retailers and B2B marketers are adopting many of the relationship-based sales techniques that direct sellers have always used. It's just that now they're calling it social selling. So if you've been around the direct selling community at all, you will have noticed that companies use any number of terms to talk about their company: direct sales, referral sales, social sales, and on and on and on. But in my experience, I believe most companies in this space are direct sellers because of their compensation plan, but they're social sellers because of their sales strategy. So take a look at the illustration that I have here. 10 years ago, every company would tell you that they were either a party plan company or a person-to-person company. 5 years ago, that was beginning to shift a little bit. Consultants with party plan companies started selling via virtual parties, which were really individual sales grouped together. Consultants with person-to-person companies started discovering that selling to a group of people was sometimes more efficient. So we saw many companies that were taking a hybrid approach to their sales strategy. But today, those strategies have merged even more and have become even more reliant on social media, to the point where I think most companies can accurately describe their sales strategy as social selling. And again, keep in mind that social selling is defined by the essential relationship component of social media, the relationship component, and social media is merely a tool that's used to foster and leverage those relationships. What I believe is really even more compelling about this shift is that it gives direct sellers an amazing opportunity to position themselves right alongside some of the most well-known, respected, and trusted mainstream retailers, while at the same time using the income opportunity as a differentiator. So quickly here, just taking a look at the illustration, there's three types of companies that engage in social selling. B2B companies, those are often technology companies, traditional retailers, and direct sellers, and what I call C2C companies here, consumer-to-consumer companies. Now, each of these companies has its own inherent strengths and weaknesses, and I think they would all be wise to take some lessons from each other. So, for example, B2B marketers are pros at the sales process. They understand, how many contacts it takes to get a sale. They live and die by their quotas, and they try to calculate the ROI of every breath that they take. Selling is a science for them. But on the flip side, they are so focused on the bottom line that relationship building is often an afterthought. Now, consumer preferences and social media have made relationship building essential to creating and maintaining loyal customers. And many B2B sellers are struggling with that. Direct sellers, on the other hand, are pros at relationship building. I mean, it's what the whole business model is based on. And it's what they have done since far before the internet even existed. But where they sometimes fall short is in the area of basic sales skills. And because so many direct sellers are part-time, their approach can tend to be more casual. They're approaching friends, so sometimes closing a sale can be awkward. And this, of course, can be a negative for consumers who are used to encountering salespeople who have a more refined sales approach. Although, sometimes consumers will complain about that too. Traditional retailers, however, are somewhere in the middle. They're very aware of the needs and preferences of their customers, mostly because of the extensive research they have done. They've got a leg up over B2B sellers when it comes to some of the tools that are necessary for relationship building. But they're still really reliant on ROI calculations, which generally aren't particularly effective measures of success when it comes to relationship building, because there's rarely a direct line between an interaction and a customer, an interaction and a sale. So the conclusion here is that all three types of these companies have something to share and something to learn about social selling. And really, they would be wise to tap into each other's strengths. So now, kind of getting back on track again, talking about how you can tell your brand story in the marketplace, it leads us to what I consider to be the essential components of telling your story. First, which is understanding the marketplace. Now, consumers have access to more information than ever before. And we talked about all the available channels from which consumers can get their information. And in most cases, they don't even have to look for it. It comes straight to their phone or tablet in massive quantities, in fact. This has empowered consumers to the point where they probably know almost everything there is to know about a company before the first actual contact even takes place. And what comes along with that is that they've already formed a pretty solid opinion about that company. So they added to all of that, they want to feel good about their purchases, and they want to feel good about the companies they buy from. And that means that telling that brand story is critical. So while the personal connection between the consumer and the seller was once the primary way consumers got their information, and that worked really well for direct selling companies, that relationship between the seller and the consumer may no longer be enough. So companies really need to focus on how their brand story is being told in the marketplace. Now, consumer attitudes are really a special consideration for direct sellers, because the same personal interactions that used to be a direct selling company's marketing plan weren't always handled in the most positive way, which gave rise to a number of negative stereotypes that really still persist today. And as a result, the terminology you use when you're describing your business is critically important. And this is another area that could be its own session. I mean, it could be 10 sessions, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. But before you use any term to describe your business, you need to explore how consumers react to that term. And you really might be surprised at the consumer perceptions of certain terms, which a lot of direct selling companies use every day and throughout their marketing materials. So it's really important to take a look and see, what are consumers thinking about your business just based on the very words that you used. Next, your brand must be inserted into the marketplace at the company level. It's the most powerful tool you can give your sellers. So not only do you have to help them take advantage of it in order to facilitate their success, but you also have to make sure that you are so thorough in your use of the brand that there is little room for what I'll call creativity, and that's in quotes, on the part of sellers. Having said that, while you want to minimize how sellers might change, adapt, or otherwise distort your brand story, you want to leave a carefully planned opening for them to insert their own personal story. So just as they were likely attracted to your company because they can relate to your company's story, many of their customers will be attracted to them because of their personal story. And I can guarantee that the investment of appropriate resources into making sure your brand story is effectively inserted into the marketplace will pay dividends down to the newest recruit. I really just can't stress that enough. So once you've made sure your brand story is out there, you also need to make sure to train your sales force not only how to tell your brand story, but how to create and use their own brand story as a complement to the corporate story. And they will likely need a lot of coaching on this. So remember when we talked about the strengths and weaknesses of different types of companies? Well, direct sellers' weakness often reveals itself when they don't have a carefully scripted personal story. And I have heard direct sellers tell all kinds of stories about their direct selling experience and why they got in and how much money they make. And while authenticity is important, there's a point where it's just too much information. And most sellers won't come with the ability to do this without coaching. So whether it's a how-to guide on your website or a session at your next convention, sellers need to be trained in creating their own brand story. They need to understand the components that are important to that. They need to understand the things that will, resonate well with consumers, and they need to understand the things that won't resonate well with consumers. And really, kind of along those same lines, they also need to understand what will and won't register very well with legislators and regulators. Believe it or not, there are, regulators who, have the ability to pass regulations that impact direct selling directly. And there are certain things that can be set out there in the marketplace, whether it's by a company or a salesperson, that can be a huge red flag for that. So sellers need to understand things that they should or shouldn't say. Now, in the end, your brand story is going to have three components. Your company story, which is amplified by each individual consultant story. Your product story, in other words, why are you selling, what are you selling, and how is that relevant to the consumer? And your opportunity story. And this is where you can differentiate your company from other retailers by adding the extra incentive of the income source. I will also point out that the importance of those individual stories also surfaces in another way. Bloggers, reporters, almost any interested party, including consumers, want to hear about people and not about companies. So as a result, it's critical that your brand story can be conveyed through your sellers and that you always lead with real people and not with your company. While your company founder may be the best face for your consultants, that may not be the case when it comes to people outside of your sales force. Corporate spokespeople often get the cold shoulder from reporters, and reporters aren't even interested in the company unless there's a real person with whom their audience can relate. So as a result, it is critical for your company to identify a core group of consultants, whether you have 10 consultants or 10,000 consultants. You need a core group of consultants who can have their personal story vetted at the company level, who can be media trained, and who are experts in your company brand story and in telling it the way you want it told. One thing I often hear from companies is that they don't want anyone in their sales force overexposed or their top sellers change frequently. And it's definitely true that those things could be important considerations for your company. But none of them is worse than being caught off guard with no one to represent your company when the opportunity arises. And in fact, you may even miss that opportunity if the only person you have to offer is somebody from corporate. I have had many occasions where reporters have really declined even to do a story because there wasn't a real person, a seller, who could talk to the topic that they wanted to explore. Putting significant resources into media training your consultants or a group of your consultants is sure to prove its worth when that first media opportunity comes up. And I will say as well that the time to train people is not when the opportunity comes up. This is something that they have to get used to telling the story so that they can tell it in the right way and they aren't ad-libbing. And so you really have to take care of this before you even get your first interaction with a reporter. And the final thing that I'll mention in this regard is that you must continually monitor how your sellers are talking about the products. Also how they're talking about your business opportunity as well as your brand. And despite the fact that they're independent consultants, your company will be held accountable for what they do and say, both in a legal sense as well as in a practical sense. So you must monitor what they're saying online, and you must correct problems immediately. The word viral can be both a dream and a nightmare for marketers. So be aware of what's happening with your brand in the marketplace at all times. You absolutely want to have Google alerts set up on for your brand, your competitors' brands, other keywords that are related to direct selling. But in a lot of cases, that's not enough. Those Google keywords don't often, get things consistently. They might be delayed in being recognized by the system. So you really need to have a system in place for media monitoring, whether that's a service that you hire directly or whether you hire a consultant who has that service available to all of their clients, who can take specific keywords, even beyond your company name, and monitor in real time what's going on out there in the marketplace, because the marketplace is happening in real time, and consumers expect responses in real time, and information on the internet spreads in real time. So if you're late to the conversation might be over before you get there. You might lose your chance to either shift the conversation from a negative to a positive, or insert yourself into a situation where you can promote your brand. So hopefully that'll give you some food for thought about how to make the most out of your company brand story. And as you consider next steps, you may want to explore outside resources that can help you with some of these things. Particularly smaller companies don't necessarily have the manpower or the expertise in-house to take care of some of the things that you might want to look at in the marketplace, and materials you might want to create, and training for your sales force. A marketplace assessment and brand story analysis are always a key place to start, followed by strategic planning and message and materials development. Smaller companies may want to consider bringing in outside resources on a long-term temporary basis to handle day-to-day tasks. And of course, companies of all sizes need to have a crisis plan in place. Media relations and corporate field training are critical aspects of success in this area. And of course, if I can be of any assistance to anyone in this area, I absolutely am happy to do that, and I am happy to field any questions.
Thank you so much for all of your input and your ideas, and just kind of how you put a finger on exactly what people need to be doing to be in good shape with their brand and their PR. I just have to ask you, Amy, what is one of the biggest challenges that companies make in the area of PR?
Well, especially for smaller companies, I hear so many times that, they don't have resources for PR, and they don't think that they need PR and reputation management when they're a small new company. And really, nothing could be further from the truth, especially in today's marketplace, because, you have a brand reputation. Your reputation precedes you. I mean, that could not be a more true statement in today's marketplace. You have a brand reputation really before you even start. As soon as you put something online, you have a reputation. And, it really, I would almost say that even for smaller companies, it's more important than for some other companies to focus on this and make sure that you're shaping your reputation in the marketplace early, so that you don't have to go through the work later of reshaping it, undoing what might be out there, and changing the reputation that you have out there in the marketplace. So, whether it's something as simple as having someone review your brand story to look for keywords that might be a red flag, to just making sure that you're putting consistent message out through social media, making sure that you're still putting out news releases on the wire. Believe it or not, news releases are still a very valid way to do public relations. You absolutely need to get some counsel on the ways that you need to talk about your brand in the marketplace, because it is a consideration for every company as soon as you found your company.
I totally agree with you, and I think what happens is people are so busy doing all the building that they don't realize. It's sort of like what we teach companies is, if you must create your culture or your field will. Well, it's sort of like that with your brand. If you don't have that strong brand message, your field will create whatever they want to create. So it's up to the company to provide the tools, the information, the resources so that the field follows and stays with that same brand. So I totally agree with you. And I had one other comment around this, and you said that sometimes people don't have a plan for something going south, or a bad press release, or misinformation getting out to the public, or those kind of things. And I've seen this more and more, that they get caught back on their heels and they can't respond quickly enough. So how does somebody go about preparing like that disaster situation process?
Mhm. Well, that is a really important process to go through, and some people have a really difficult time with it, because the first thing you have to do in that situation is you have to try and think of as many scenarios as you possibly can of when something can go wrong. So, the first thing you want to sit down and you say, okay, what could possibly happen in the marketplace that would affect my company? And that can be things that directly affect your company or indirectly affect your company. So, it could be, something where, one of your, consultants does or says something that is a problem for one reason or another. But it could also be the mere fact that a competitor of yours does something that is perceived as negative. That can also reflect on you. So you have to think of all those things that could possibly go wrong, and then you have to think of a scenario for how you would handle each one of those things. And it's difficult because you never know what all of the scenarios are going to be. You don't know exactly how it's going to play out or when. But it's so important to be prepared for as many situations as you can think of, because then you're more likely to have something that you can easily adapt to whatever the situation ultimately ends up being. So, having somebody who can help you brainstorm those ideas, and then thinking really critically about, who's your spokesperson going to be if there's a problem? How are you going to, time-wise, how are you going to get this information out to the audiences that need to see it? And, even you need to, I also recommend to companies in this case that you need to run drills with your field, or with your employees and with your field to some extent. Pretend that it is happening. How are they going to respond to it? Will they be able to carry out the plan that you've put together in a way that's going to make a difference for your company? So it is really important to plan.
I totally agree with you, and I think people don't want to think negatively. We're all pretty positive, happy people, but something can happen, and I'm sure you have more experience than anybody else I know in the area of what could go wrong, because you've probably seen it all, haven't you?
Yes, there are some really surprising things that can go wrong, and the more prepared for you, the quicker those problems will hopefully go away.
I would agree. So everyone, be sure to reach out to Amy Robinson. The name of her company is Social Selling Associates. Her email is amy@socialsellingassociates.com, and her website is socialsellingassociates.com. If you'd like to call her, I know she'd be happy to speak with you. Her number is U.S. number 1-301-742-5645. And Amy, I believe you work internationally as well as domestically, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are honored to have you be a part of the DSWA family, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. And please go back and check out other executive forums. We have several of them up on the website for all of our corporate executives. We'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing here at DSWA and learn from experts such as Amy Robinson. Thank you again, Amy.
Thank you.